My brother stole my wife 4 years ago, but my dad's secret left them shocked. As the room sat in stunned silence, Michael's voice cut through the tension. The truth is, I knew what you did, Ryan. And I knew, Sarah, how you justified it all to yourself. You thought you were building a new life, but you were only digging a deeper hole. He opened the manila envelope, revealing a set of legal documents. This isn't just my will. It's proof that every cent of the inheritance I left in your care was siphoned away to fund your lifestyle, vacations, luxury cars, all while your mother lay dying in a state-run facility. Ryan's face turned ashen, Sarah's composure cracked, her hands trembling. You can't do this, Ryan stammered, his voice a broken whisper. Michael leaned back, a sad but resolute look on his face. Oh, but I already have. Everything goes to Ethan. The house, the investments, the business. And I've already spoken to the authorities. You'll be hearing from them soon. Ethan sat still, the weight of his father's words settling over him. He had expected answers, but not justice delivered so sharply, so completely. As Ryan and Sarah stood, their faces a mixture of betrayal and disbelief, Ethan finally spoke. I spent years wondering why you did it. Now I don't need to. You showed me exactly who you are, and now the world will see it too. If this story hit home, drop a 1 in the comments. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal and redemption, and share this video to keep our community growing. Ethan sat on his small front porch in Denver, cradling a steaming cup of coffee as the early morning sun bathed the modest neighborhood in a soft golden light. His home was nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom bungalow with peeling paint and a squeaky screen door, but it was his. After 4 years of painstakingly rebuilding his life, Ethan had found comfort in the simplicity of his surroundings. The house had become a sanctuary, each corner filled with quiet reminders of his journey from heartbreak to healing. 4 years ago, Ethan's world had collapsed. His younger brother Ryan had not only betrayed him, but also stolen the person he thought he would spend his life with, Sarah, his wife of 8 years. Their affair had torn through Ethan's life like a wildfire, leaving behind only ash and unanswered questions. Ryan, always the golden child, had flaunted his new relationship with Sarah openly. Their smugness had been almost as painful as the betrayal itself. But Ethan had chosen a different path. Rather than letting the betrayal define him, he threw himself into work, fitness, and self-discovery. He'd built a life that, while quieter than before, was solid and true. His modest home bore the signs of someone learning to live again. A small vegetable garden, dog-eared books on healing and growth, and a half-finished woodworking project on the back patio. These small details told a story of resilience, each day a quiet victory over the past. Ethan's days were built around routines that brought him peace. He worked as a project manager at a local construction company, finding solace in the predictability of blueprints and the hum of tools at work. His evenings were spent on long hikes through the foothills or with a brush in hand, adding fresh strokes to the canvas of his latest painting. The walls of his home displayed his art, vibrant landscapes and serene abstracts, each piece a reminder that beauty could emerge from brokenness. The house was a testament to his journey. He had painted the walls himself, choosing warm earth tones to replace the sterile whites of his past. He built the bookshelves in his living room, filling them with titles that had guided him through the darkest times. Meditation books sat next to novels about second chances, their spines worn and familiar. Though his life was modest, it was honest. Ethan had cut ties with the people who had only wanted to gossip about his brother's betrayal. His circle was smaller now, but each connection was genuine. His best friend Marcus often stopped by for Sunday barbecues, and the neighbor's dog had adopted Ethan as a second owner, often curling up on his porch for an afternoon nap. While the scars of the past remained, Ethan wore them with quiet dignity. He had learned to live with the ache, like an old injury that only twinged in certain weather. Most days he felt steady, but every now and then a reminder of Ryan and Sarah's betrayal would surface, testing the strength of his new foundation. And on this particular morning, as his phone rang with an unfamiliar number, he felt the first tremor of an approaching storm. Ethan's life had become a patchwork of small victories. His modest home was a testament to quiet resilience, a place where every repaired faucet and freshly painted wall felt like reclaiming a bit of himself. He had transformed his backyard into a vegetable garden, a project that grew from a desperate need to nurture something. The garden had become a sanctuary, a symbol of growth that mirrored his own. In the evenings, he often sat at his worn kitchen table, surrounded by the comforting hum of the old refrigerator. He wrote in a leather-bound journal, documenting his thoughts and the steady progress of his healing. The pages were filled with raw honesty, moments of doubt and glimmers of hope. He had learned to find joy in the ordinary, in the steam rising from his coffee, in the rhythm of his footsteps on a quiet trail, in the satisfaction of a well-built bookshelf. Ethan had also immersed himself in new hobbies. He took up painting, allowing the strokes of his brush to express what words couldn't. His artwork hung on his walls, abstracts and landscapes that held both the chaos and calm of his journey. The house was filled with soft, warm light, a contrast to the darkness he had once felt. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his, built on a foundation of hard-won peace. But peace, as Ethan had learned, could be fragile. The phone rang mid-morning, its abrupt tone cutting through the quiet. He glanced at the screen. His father's name flashed across it. Michael wasn't one for casual calls, especially not on a weekday. Ethan hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen before answering. "Ethan, we need to have a family meeting. Tomorrow," Michael said. His voice was uncharacteristically sharp, devoid of warmth. Ethan's pulse quickened. "What's going on?" "Your brother will be there. Sarah, too?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Is this necessary?" "It's not a request, Ethan. Be here at 6 p.m. Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He stood in his kitchen, the room suddenly colder, the silence pressing down on him. He set the phone on the counter, staring at it as if it might offer answers. Ethan's mind raced, dragging him back to the past he had worked so hard to leave behind. The last time he had seen Ryan and Sarah, their smiles had been as sharp as knives. They had sat across from him at a legal mediation, dividing up the life he had built with Sarah. Their betrayal had been public, brutal, and final. He had walked away from that room with nothing but his dignity, a fragile thing that had taken years to rebuild. Now the thought of seeing them again made his chest tighten. Why now? Why this sudden urgency from his father? Michael had always been a man of few words, a man who valued action over talk. Whatever this meeting was about, it had to be serious. Ethan felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Part of him wanted to ignore the summons, to stay cocooned in his carefully crafted world, but he knew that avoiding this confrontation would only prolong the inevitable. He had learned through painful experience that some wounds didn't heal unless you faced them head-on. Memories stirred, of shared holidays, of Sarah's laughter in their old home, of Ryan's easy charm that had hidden so many lies. The emotions came in waves, hurt, anger, and something deeper, a quiet fear of reopening the old wounds. He had spent years stitching himself back together, and the thought of those scars being ripped open again was almost too much to bear. Ethan took a deep breath, grounding himself. He wasn't the same man he had been 4 years ago. He had built a new life, a stronger version of himself. Whatever happened at this meeting, he could handle it. He had to. The sun had shifted by the time he moved again, casting long shadows through the window. His garden, bathed in golden light, remained steady, and so would he. As he stood in the doorway of his home, a thought settled into his mind, a quiet whisper of unease. His father's voice had been firm, not inviting, but commanding. A family meeting. With Ryan and Sarah? Ethan's gut told him this wasn't just about family. It was about something bigger, something that had been building beneath the surface for years. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a conversation. It was a turning point. And as the evening drew closer, he couldn't help but wonder. A family meeting? After everything they did to me? I had no idea this was the moment my entire life would change. Ethan pulled into his father's driveway, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. The old Victorian house stood as it always had, stoic, timeless, its wraparound porch draped in ivy. It was a place filled with echoes of his childhood. Bike rides on the lawn, the smell of his mother's baking wafting through open windows, the warm glow of family holidays. But today, those memories felt distant, overshadowed by the chill of what awaited inside. Stepping out of the car, Ethan's pulse quickened. The familiar creak of the porch steps and the soft hum of wind chimes only heightened his sense of unease. He hesitated at the door, his hand resting on the worn brass handle before pushing it open. The house greeted him with silence, the kind that felt heavy, almost deliberate. He could smell his father's cigars, the lingering scent mixed with lavender, his late mother's favorite. The blend of comfort and sadness twisted something inside him. Ethan moved through the hallway, past old family photos that captured simpler times. His younger self smiled back at him from the wall, a boy with unknowing eyes, standing beside the brother who had since become a stranger. As he reached the living room, his breath slowed, each step pulling him deeper into a world where the past and present collided. They were already there. Ryan sat sprawled in a high-backed armchair, legs crossed, an air of casual dominance about him. His hair was styled just so, his shirt crisp and expensive. His watch, a brand that screamed money, glinted under the soft lamplight. He looked every bit the golden child, the one who had always landed on his feet, regardless of who got trampled underneath. Sarah sat on the couch, her posture languid but calculated. She wore a soft cashmere sweater and jeans that likely cost more than Ethan's monthly mortgage. Her hair, perfectly styled, framed a face that still held a dangerous kind of beauty. When her eyes met Ethan's, she didn't look away. Instead, a slow, amused smile spread across her lips, like a cat watching a cornered mouse. "Look who finally decided to show up," Ryan drawled, not bothering to rise. His voice held a familiar mix of mockery and boredom. Ethan forced himself to remain calm. "I came because Dad asked me to." Sarah's smile widened, a hint of cruelty beneath her polished exterior. "Always the dutiful son." Ethan sat on the edge of the sofa, maintaining distance. The room felt smaller with them in it, their presence warping the air. He was hyper-aware of everything, the subtle exchange of glances between them, the way Ryan's fingers drummed rhythmically on the armrest, the soft scuff of Sarah's heel against the hardwood floor. Ryan leaned forward, his blue eyes cold. "Still living in that little shack on Elm Street?" Ethan met his gaze steadily. "It's a home, not a shack." "Sure, if that's what you want to call it," Ryan said, his lips curling. "I guess not everyone needs to aim high." Sarah laughed softly, a sound like glass breaking underfoot. "I suppose after everything, keeping things small is probably best." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. He had learned to pick his battles, to let their barbs fall flat. His silence was his shield, each unspoken word a reminder of how far he had come. Ryan's expression shifted, the subtle annoyance of someone used to getting a reaction. "What's the matter, Ethan? Got nothing to say? You used to be so spirited." Ethan's voice was measured. "I'm here for Dad, not for this." Sarah's eyes glittered. "You know, Ryan and I were just talking about you, wondering if you ever moved on, or if you're still clinging to the past." Ethan took a slow breath. "The past is where it belongs, behind me." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Ryan's fingers stopped drumming, the quiet a sharp edge between them. "You always were good at playing the victim," Ryan said, his tone sharper now. "But life moves on. You should try it sometime." Ethan leaned back, his own expression unreadable. "Funny, I could say the same to you." For a moment, silence settled over them, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, each movement of its hands a reminder that time, unlike them, never stayed still. Ethan sat still, his pulse drumming in his ears as Ryan's words echoed in the room. The air between them was sharp, each exchange like a well-aimed blade. He knew this feeling too well, the slow burn of old wounds reopening, the bitter sting of being in the same room with the people who had turned his life upside down. It was like standing in a storm, the wind cold and relentless, but he held his ground. There are moments in life when someone's words cut straight to the bone, when every instinct tells you to lash out, to defend yourself, to strike back. But Ethan had learned the power of silence, of not giving them the satisfaction of seeing him unravel. His strength was in his stillness, in the quiet defiance that came from surviving the worst and choosing to keep going. If you've ever had to stand your ground, if you've ever faced someone who tried to tear you down and chose to hold on to your dignity instead, you know the strength it takes. Share your story. It might help someone else find the courage to face their own storm. The door at the far end of the room opened and Michael stepped in. His presence filled the room, not with volume but with gravity. He moved slower than Ethan remembered, his frame thinner, the lines on his face deeper. His gray hair seemed almost translucent in the late afternoon light, but his eyes held the same sharpness that had always kept his sons in line. He wore a simple cardigan over a pressed shirt, his usual uniform of quiet authority, but it was the thick manila envelope in his hand that drew everyone's attention. He held it close to his chest as if it were something precious or perhaps something dangerous. The envelope was worn at the edges, its contents heavy enough to bend it slightly in the middle. Ethan's mind raced, possibilities and fears intertwining. Michael took his time crossing the room. He didn't look at any of them, his focus ahead, his steps deliberate. When he finally settled into his armchair, the entire room seemed to shift around him, the way planets align around a sun. His silence drew them in, building anticipation with every breath he didn't take. The room fell into a deep, suffocating quiet. Ethan felt it in his chest, the weight of whatever was about to unfold. Ryan's expression had shifted, his earlier bravado slipping into something more cautious. Sarah had stopped fidgeting, her practiced poise betraying a flicker of unease. Michael placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. His hands rested lightly on top of it, fingers intertwined, the gesture deceptively calm. His breathing was steady, but Ethan noticed the faint tremor in his hands, a crack in the stone facade. For a long moment, no one spoke. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, its rhythm almost mocking the tension. When Michael finally lifted his gaze, his eyes moved over them with a weight that settled in the room like dust. His voice when he spoke was soft but unwavering. "There are things we need to discuss, things that cannot wait." The words hung in the air, each syllable deliberate. Ethan didn't move. He barely breathed. Somewhere deep inside him, a small voice whispered that everything was about to change. Michael's hands rested on the worn envelope, his fingers brushing over its frayed edges. He looked each of them in the eye, first Ryan, then Sarah, and finally Ethan. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of something unmovable. "I don't have much time left," he began. "The doctors say 3 months, maybe less." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had noticed his father's frailty, the hollowed cheeks, the slowed movements, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a stone dropping into his chest. His father, the strongest man he had ever known, was dying. Across the room, Ryan's smirk vanished, his posture straightened, hands twitching slightly as if searching for something to hold on to. Sarah's expression shifted too. Her confidence wavered, and for the first time the practiced mask slipped. Her lips parted, but no words came. "Cancer," Michael continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "It's too late for treatment, so I'm not wasting time. There are things that need to be set right before I go." The room seemed to contract, pulling them all into the gravity of his words. The arrogance that had clung to Ryan and Sarah like a second skin was peeling away, leaving only raw nerves and uncertainty. Ethan forced himself to breathe evenly, to keep his focus on his father's face. Whatever this was, it was only just beginning. Michael drew the envelope closer, flipping open the clasp with a careful hand. He pulled out a stack of papers, their edges marked with highlighter and handwritten notes. His eyes darkened as he laid the documents on the coffee table, spreading them like cards in a losing hand. "These are bank statements," he said, "records of transactions over the last 4 years, payments that should have gone to cover your mother's medical expenses." His gaze settled on Ryan. "But they didn't." Ethan felt the room shift, the air thickening. Ryan's face turned a blotchy red, his fingers curling into the armrests of his chair. Sarah's polished exterior cracked, her manicured nails dug into the fabric of the couch, leaving small, crescent-shaped imprints. "There's more." Michael reached into the envelope and produced a small USB drive. "I had a private investigator look into this. There's footage, photos." He slid the drive across the table, its metallic sheen a stark contrast to the old wood. Ryan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Sarah's breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. "The money I sent each month," Michael continued, "was meant for hospital bills, treatments, making your mother's last days as comfortable as possible. But instead, you two were using it to fund vacations, to dine in places your mother never even dreamed of, to buy things you didn't need while she lay dying." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His mother, frail and fading, had spent her last days believing her family was by her side, doing everything they could. But now, the truth hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Ryan finally found his voice, but it was weak, nothing like the confident barbs he had thrown earlier. "Dad," I can explain." "There is no explanation," Michael cut him off, his tone as sharp as a blade. "You stole from your own mother. You stole from me." The words reverberated in the room, each syllable a blow. Ethan watched as the color drained from Ryan's face, his features twisting between anger and desperation. Sarah looked as if the floor might swallow her whole, her earlier amusement now a ghost haunting her expression. Ethan couldn't move. The betrayal was like a second betrayal, layers upon layers of deceit that cut deeper than he thought possible. He had known Ryan and Sarah were capable of selfishness, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Ryan's bravado crumbled under the weight of the evidence. His hands shook, the knuckles white against the worn leather of the armchair. His lips moved, forming words that never made it past his throat. Sarah's poised demeanor shattered, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her fingers clutched the edge of the couch as if it might anchor her to the reality that was slipping away. "You always think you're so righteous," Ryan finally spat, but the anger lacked its usual edge. It was the sound of a man drowning, grasping at straws. "You don't understand what it was like. The pressure, the expectations." "Expectations to what?" Michael's voice cut through the room, cold and unforgiving. "To betray your family? To rob your mother of her dignity?" Sarah's eyes darted around the room, her perfect composure unraveling. We thought it was temporary. We were struggling. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Ethan's hands tightened into fists, his nails pressing into his palms. The disbelief, the rage, the grief, it all crashed over him in a wave. He had spent years piecing his life back together, and now the fragments of the truth lay at his feet, jagged and sharp. Ryan's mask of arrogance was gone, leaving behind a hollow man. Sarah's calm was fractured, each breath a reminder that the walls they had built were closing in, and in the center of it all stood Michael, his presence both the judge and the executioner, his silence more damning than any words could have been. If you've made it this far, thank you. Sharing stories like this isn't always easy, but knowing that you're here, listening, makes a world of difference. Sometimes life throws us curveballs that shake us to our core, and it's in those moments that finding a community, people who understand, matters most. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever faced betrayal or had to rebuild your life from the ground up, consider sharing your experience in the comments. Your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to keep going. Michael took a deep breath, his frail hands steadying on the envelope as if bracing himself for what came next. He pulled out a sheaf of crisp white papers, his will. The sight of it shifted the room's energy, drawing every eye to the document that held their futures. "My will," Michael said quietly, his voice a stone dropped into a still pond. "I've made some changes recently, adjustments to reflect the truth of what's happened in this family." Ryan's head snapped up, his earlier desperation giving way to a sharp focus. His expression was a mix of disbelief and expectation, as if waiting for Michael to reassure him, to tell him everything would still go his way. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her fingers easing their grip on the couch, a flicker of hope lighting her features. But Michael's next words cut through their illusions like a knife. "Everything, my estate, the house, the business, investments, and all financial assets, will go to Ethan." Silence crashed down. Ryan's face went slack, his confidence evaporating in an instant. Sarah's breath caught, a tiny gasp that seemed to echo through the room. "What?" Ryan's voice was thin, stretched tight with disbelief. "You can't do that. I'm your son, you can't just—" "I can, and I have." Michael's calm was unyielding, a wall against Ryan's rising panic. "You don't deserve it, not after what you've done." Sarah's expression twisted, a desperate mix of shock and anger. We assumed that you could take and never face the consequences?" Michael's gaze was cold, his words steady. "You stole from your own mother, and you did it with a smile. There is no place for greed here, not in my legacy." Ryan's composure shattered, his hands balled into fists, his breathing sharp and uneven. For years he had lived with the certainty that his father's wealth would cushion every fall, that no matter how far he pushed, the safety net would hold. But now the ground had opened beneath him, and there was nothing but the hard, cold truth waiting below. Michael reached into the envelope again, pulling out a stack of documents bound with a thin black band. His fingers moved methodically as he laid the papers on the coffee table, each page a piece of a puzzle that had taken him months to complete. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice softer now but no less sharp. "I didn't just find out about the stolen medical funds. I found everything." Ethan's brow furrowed, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. "What do you mean, everything?" Michael's eyes met his, a sorrow there that ran deep. "Ryan and Sarah didn't just steal from your mother. They used your name, Ethan. They took out loans in your name, maxed out credit cards, and defaulted on payments, all while you were still trying to rebuild your life." The room seemed to sway. Ethan's mind raced, connecting the dots of late fees, strange calls from creditors, and a credit score that had mysteriously plummeted. He had thought it was fallout from the divorce, the financial turbulence of starting over, but now he saw the truth. A calculated betrayal that had reached further than he could have imagined. Ryan's face twisted, a mask of guilt and anger. "It was just paperwork. You had good credit and we needed help. You would have been fine if you weren't so weak." "Weak?" Ethan's voice rose, not with volume but with a force that silenced the room. "You destroyed my life. You didn't just take my wife. You tried to take my future." Sarah's bravado crumbled. Tears pooled in her eyes, not from remorse, but from fear. "We didn't think you'd find out. It was only supposed to be temporary. We were struggling and you seemed to be doing okay." Ethan stared at them, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on him. All those years of struggle, of piecing himself back together, only to learn that the knife had been twisting long after he thought the wound had closed. Michael's voice cut through, a low rumble of finality. "I have the documents, the proof. I could take this to the authorities. I could make sure you pay for every dollar you stole, for every lie you told. But I'm giving you a choice." Ryan's jaw clenched, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. "What choice?" "Leave," Michael said simply. "Walk away now, disappear from our lives, or fight this, and I promise you, I will bring everything down on you. Legally, financially, there will be nothing left." The threat hung in the air, a tightrope stretched thin between them. Ryan looked to Sarah, but her expression had hardened, the alliance between them already fracturing under the weight of survival. Ethan sat back, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. This wasn't just an end, it was a reckoning, and as he watched his brother's world unravel, he felt the first real breath of freedom he had known in years. Ryan and Sarah's downfall was swift and unrelenting. Without Michael's financial backing, their once lavish lifestyle crumbled beneath them. The house, a sprawling modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and a heated pool, was the first to go. The bank repossessed it within weeks, and their carefully curated life of luxury was dismantled one auction at a time. The cars, the designer clothes, even the art on their walls, all sold to cover debts that seemed to multiply overnight. Ryan's job, which he had secured through his father's connections, was not as stable as he'd imagined. Once word spread of the financial mismanagement and the legal threats hanging over him, the company quietly severed ties. His former colleagues, who had once envied his easy success, now avoided him, their whispers echoing in the halls where he had once walked with an air of superiority. Sarah, who had always worn her ambition like a designer coat, shed her loyalty just as easily. At first, she stayed, her desperation thinly veiled behind forced optimism. She urged Ryan to find a new investor, to call old friends, to beg if necessary. But the doors kept closing, and as the money dried up, so did her patience. Her phone, once filled with contacts of influence and wealth, became a tool of escape. She began disappearing for longer stretches, her stories of errands and meetups growing less believable. One evening, Ryan came home to find the apartment, now a small, dim rental far from their former neighborhood, eerily quiet. The closet doors hung open, half empty. Drawers left ajar revealed only the remnants of a life she had abandoned. A single note lay on the kitchen counter, a few hastily scribbled words. "I can't do this anymore." Sarah had vanished, taking what little remained of their liquid assets and cutting all ties. Her social media accounts were deleted, her number disconnected. Through fragmented whispers from mutual acquaintances, Ryan learned she had moved out of state, possibly under a new name. The betrayal he had once inflicted was now his own burden to bear, the sting of being left behind a bitter echo of what he had once caused. Ryan's spiral into financial ruin was mirrored by his personal collapse. His pride, which had always been his strongest armor, offered no protection against the harsh realities of his new life. He tried reaching out to old friends, but their responses were cold or non-existent. He attempted to find work, but his reputation had preceded him, and no one wanted to take a chance on a man with such a public fall from grace. The last few months of Michael's life were spent in quiet peace with Ethan. Michael's decline was gentle, his days filled with stories and shared memories, with the sun filtering through the windows and a sense of closure settling over them both. When he finally passed, it was with his son by his side, his hand held in the warmth of forgiveness and love. For Ethan, the aftermath was a complex blend of emotions. He felt a deep, settling satisfaction watching karma unfold, a sense of balance returning to a life that had been off kilter for so long. But it wasn't all relief. There was an undercurrent of sadness that ebbed and flowed with each reminder of what he had lost: the years of struggle, the friendships that had drifted away, the nights spent questioning his own worth. All of it lingered like a scar. He had never wished for Ryan's ruin, not truly. What he had wanted was justice, and perhaps a little redemption. But now, seeing his brother so lost and alone, Ethan couldn't help but mourn for what might have been. He mourned not for the man Ryan had become, but for the brother he used to know, for the family they might have been if greed and betrayal had not carved such deep divides. Yet through the sorrow there was hope. Each day Ethan rose to a life he had built with his own hands. His house, though modest, was filled with warmth. His garden thrived, his art filled the walls, and his heart, though still healing, beat with strength. He saw this chapter not as the end of a painful story, but as the beginning of something new, a chance to reclaim not just his life, but his joy. The sky hung low and gray on the day of Michael's funeral, the kind of overcast that made the world feel smaller, quieter. The cemetery was tucked away in the hills, where tall pines whispered in the wind and gravestones stood as solemn reminders of those who had come and gone. Friends, old neighbors, and a handful of Michael's former business partners gathered in tight clusters, their voices muffled beneath the weight of loss. Ethan stood near the casket, his black coat buttoned tightly against the chill. His face was calm, a quiet strength that had settled into his features over the past few months. He had been there in his father's final days, holding his hand, sharing stories, letting Michael slip away with dignity and love. The closure was a gift, one last act of healing in a lifetime that had often been filled with pain. As the priest's voice murmured through the final prayers, Ethan became aware of a presence lingering at the edge of the crowd. A figure stood apart from the rest, his frame gaunt, his posture hunched against an invisible weight. When the service ended and the mourners began to drift away, offering soft words and gentle touches on the arm, the figure moved closer, hesitant but determined. It was Ryan. His clothes hung loose, a mix of old and worn, nothing like the tailored suits he used to wear. His hair was unkempt, his skin pale beneath the shadows of exhaustion. His eyes, once so sharp with arrogance, were now rimmed with red, hollow and searching. Ethan didn't move. He watched as Ryan approached, each step tentative, as if the ground might give way beneath him. When Ryan finally stood before him, they were close enough that Ethan could see the faint tremble in his brother's hands, the way his breath clouded the air between them. "Ethan," Ryan started, his voice rough, scraping against the silence. I didn't think you'd let me come." Ethan's expression remained steady. "I didn't stop you." Ryan's gaze dropped to the ground. His shoes were scuffed, the leather cracked. He looked like a man who had lost more than money. He had lost himself. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong. About all of it." There was a time when those words might have shattered something in Ethan, when he might have opened himself to hope, to the idea that forgiveness could mend what had been broken. But now, standing in the shadow of their father's grave, he felt only a quiet resolve. "You made your choices, Ryan," he said softly. "Now live with them." Ryan's shoulders sagged, the last threads of his composure unraveling. "I have nowhere to go, no one else to turn to. Sarah's gone, the friends, they won't even take my calls. I'm nothing without Dad's money." Ethan's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Without someone else to clean up your mess?" Ryan's face twisted with a mix of regret and fear. "Please, I know I don't deserve it, but I need help." Ethan looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the remnants of the brother he had once loved. A boy who had shared his room, his secrets, his dreams. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had burned every bridge and now stood at the edge of a cliff, looking for a hand to pull him back. "I can't help you," Ethan said. His words were not harsh, but they held a finality that settled over them like dust. Not anymore. Ryan's eyes filled with a desperation that seemed to age him, the weight of his choices carving lines into his skin. What am I supposed to do? Ethan took a slow breath, the cool air filling his lungs. You figure it out. You move forward, or you don't. But that's on you. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, without another word, Ryan turned and walked away. His silhouette, thin and unsteady, disappeared among the gravestones, swallowed by the mist and the quiet. Ethan remained by his father's grave, his heart both heavy and light. He had thought this moment might break him, that facing Ryan's remorse would pull him back into the dark, but instead he felt a release, a sense that the chains of the past had finally fallen away. As the last of the mourners departed and the cemetery settled back into stillness, Ethan knelt by the grave. His fingers brushed the cool earth, the connection between him and his father still strong, still real. "I did it, Dad," he whispered. "I let go." And as he rose to leave, the wind moved gently through the pines, a soft, steady sound like the world breathing with him. If you've made it this far, thank you, truly. Sharing a story like this isn't just about reliving the pain, it's about finding meaning in it, about offering a hand to someone who might be in their own dark place. Your support, whether through a comment, a like, or sharing this story, turns these words into something more than just a tale. It makes them a lifeline. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal or find strength when you felt empty, consider subscribing. Not just for more stories, but to be part of a community where real experiences matter, where your voice can make a difference. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, someone standing at the edge of their own cliff, share this video. You never know the impact a single story can have. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of connection to change a life. Ethan stood at the edge of the cemetery, watching as Ryan's figure disappeared into the mist. The weight of the moment pressed against his chest, but beneath it was a budding lightness, a sense of space where there had once been only tight, aching knots. He had expected to feel anger, or maybe even guilt, but instead, all he felt was relief. The world seemed to breathe with him as if the quiet hills and rustling trees understood the gravity of what had just happened. He had let go not just of Ryan, but of the years of pain and betrayal that had shadowed his every step. With each crunch of gravel beneath his shoes as he walked away, he felt another piece of his old life slip free, lost to the wind. Ethan's steps were steady, his shoulders no longer heavy with the burdens of the past. He moved with a quiet confidence, a man who had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed but reforged. The path ahead was his to choose, each step a promise to himself to live fully, openly, without the weight of old wounds dragging him down. As he reached his car and the world outside the cemetery came back into focus, he felt it fully. Freedom. And it tasted like hope. In the months that followed, Ethan channeled his inheritance into something meaningful. He established the Grace Foundation, named after his late mother, whose kindness had always been the quiet force holding their family together. The foundation focused on helping families in need, providing support for medical expenses, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and funding community projects. Each initiative was a tribute to the compassion his mother had shown throughout her life, an echo of the love she had given so freely. Ethan found himself surrounded by a new kind of wealth, not measured in dollars, but in the smiles of those he helped. He spent his days working with local organizations, organizing food drives, and attending school events where kids shared their dreams of becoming doctors, artists, or teachers. The stories he heard, the lives he touched, brought him a sense of fulfillment that no material success ever could. His home became a hub of warmth and activity. He hosted gatherings for his team, volunteers, and the families they supported. Laughter filled the rooms, and conversations lingered long into the evenings. His walls, once bare, now showcased art from local students and photographs of the foundation's work, a testament to the new life he had built. He reconnected with old friends, those who had stood by him during his hardest days. They saw the change in him, the lightness in his step, the genuine joy that had replaced the guarded caution he once wore like armor. His best friend, Marcus, became a regular at Sunday dinners, their bond deeper than ever, forged through shared history and unwavering support. Ethan also began to write. He shared his story at community centers, speaking openly about betrayal, healing, and finding purpose through pain. His vulnerability resonated with others, and soon he was invited to speak at events, his words inspiring those who felt lost or broken. He never framed himself as a hero, only as someone who had learned, painfully and slowly, how to turn his scars into something beautiful. Looking back, Ethan often marveled at how far he had come. There were days when he still felt the echoes of the past, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as gentle reminders of his strength, the quiet proof that he had not only survived but had thrived. Sometimes he would sit on his front porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over his small garden. The tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, the herbs filled the air with a crisp, clean scent. It was a simple life, but it was honest, built on foundations he had laid with his own hands. Ethan knew that wealth could build walls, but love and purpose built bridges. He had seen both sides, what it meant to lose everything and what it felt like to find more than he ever thought possible. His journey from betrayal to redemption had not been a straight path, but every twist and turn had led him here, to a place where peace was not just a fleeting feeling but a steady state of being. For the first time, he felt no rush to move forward, no need to prove anything to anyone. He was exactly where he needed to be, surrounded by people who valued him not for what he had, but for who he was. And that, more than anything, was the life he had always dreamed of living. Betrayal has a way of breaking you open. It shatters the walls you built, leaves your life scattered in pieces, and makes you question everything you thought you knew. But sometimes, when the dust settles, you realize those broken pieces are not just remnants of what you lost. They're fragments of a new beginning. Ethan's story is proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, that the cracks left behind can let in the light. We often think of betrayal as the end, but what if it's the beginning? What if the pain is not a wall, but a door, opening to a life you never imagined? The truth is, the real power doesn't lie in getting even, it lies in how you choose to rebuild. What you create from the wreckage can be stronger, more beautiful, more honest than anything that stood before. So, ask yourself, if you were given a second chance, what would your next chapter look like? Would you hold on to the hurt, or would you use it to carve out a new path? Share your story, your hopes, your dreams in the comments. You never know, your voice might be the one that helps someone else find their way. Healing is not a straight line. It's messy, uneven, and often takes you to places you never expected. But at its core, healing is not about revenge or proving a point. It's about finding peace. Moving forward with grace, with dignity, is the ultimate victory. It's a quiet strength, a steady light in the darkness. Ethan could have let his pain consume him. He could have focused on bringing his brother down, on reclaiming what was stolen from him. But instead, he chose a different path. He chose to build, to give, to heal, not just himself but the world around him. His foundation, his work, his new connections, these are not monuments to his suffering but to his resilience. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked something within you, consider staying connected. Subscribe for more stories of strength, of redemption, of the beautiful, messy reality of life. And if you know someone who is struggling, someone who feels trapped by their own story, share this video. It might be the reminder they need that a new chapter is always possible. Every story matters, every step forward is a victory, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply choose hope. As Ethan learned, life is not about erasing the scars, but embracing them. They are part of the map that led you to where you are today. So take a moment, breathe, and know that no matter where you've been, your story isn't over. There is always time to start again, to write a new chapter, one filled with purpose, with love, and with the quiet, unshakable peace that comes from knowing you are enough. Thank you for being here, for sharing this journey. Let's keep building, keep healing, and keep choosing hope together. Ethan's life had become a tapestry of warmth and purpose. His days started with quiet moments on his front porch, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands as the sun rose over his thriving garden. The simple rituals of morning had taken on new meaning. Each sip of coffee, each breath of cool air, a reminder of how far he had come. The Grace Foundation had blossomed into a cornerstone of the community. Ethan spent his days surrounded by people who shared his vision. His office, filled with photos of smiling kids at scholarship ceremonies and handwritten thank you notes from families, was a daily reminder of the impact he was making. His team had become like family, their camaraderie built not just on work but on shared values and genuine care for one another. Ethan often hosted gatherings at his home. The modest bungalow that once felt so empty was now filled with laughter and the soft murmur of conversations. Volunteers, friends, and neighbors gathered around his kitchen table, sharing meals and stories. He loved these evenings. The way the house glowed with life, the way each voice added a new thread to the story of his home. Marcus, his best friend, remained a constant presence. They would spend Sunday afternoons grilling in the backyard, talking about everything from work to future plans. It was in these quiet moments, with the sun setting and the hum of friendship around him, that Ethan felt most at peace. His art had also become a form of expression and healing. He painted not just for himself but for the foundation, creating pieces that were auctioned to support their programs. His work hung in community centers and schools, a vibrant testament to his journey from pain to purpose. Ethan had learned to let go, not just of the past, but of the need to prove himself. He no longer looked over his shoulder, no longer waited for the next blow to fall. Instead, he looked forward, his eyes on the horizon, his heart steady and open. The video closes with a view of Ethan standing on his porch, the golden light of dusk settling over him. His silhouette is calm, his shoulders relaxed. The world around him hums with the quiet contentment of a life rebuilt, of a story reclaimed. As the screen fades to black, a final thought lingers. Sometimes the best way to close a chapter is to write a new one. And in every sunrise, in every laugh shared over a backyard meal, Ethan was doing just that, writing a story not defined by what he had lost, but by all he had found.